I first met our next speaker when he was speaking at a physical conference, and I thought, well, we're having a physical conference, we've got to get him back. And I learned more about viruses than I ever thought I wanted to learn as a travel journalist. Please welcome Dr. Paul Tambyah, who is the president-elect of the International Society of Infectious Diseases, to join us. Paul, please join us. Thank you for joining us at a travel conference again. He's probably thinking, what am I doing at a travel conference, right?
Well, you guys are brave enough to hold conferences. We haven't had a medical conference for a really long time.
Oops.
Well, we have one next month, though.
Oh, you do? In Singapore?
In Singapore, it's a hybrid.
Right, a hybrid. Okay, so you came to learn how we do it here?
That's right. In fact, my conference organizer may be here somewhere.
Okay, good to share, knowledge. So the best news for us in travel last week came from the US, right, which is opening doors to all vaccinated travelers from November 8th. Do you think every country should follow that?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think, it's been more than a year and a half since the pandemic started, and the virus is everywhere. So travel restrictions are appropriate at the beginning when you've got the pandemic or you've got an epidemic in a few countries, like when they had the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. Then it's totally understandable to put in travel restrictions. But we talked about this the last time. The WHO has actually said there should not be any travel restrictions except for infected travelers, but no country follows that.
And I was thinking that, during our last conversation, you said to me too, and I'm going to hold you to that. In April, you said that the possibility that WHO could declare an end to the pandemic by or towards end of the third quarter. So is that going to happen?
Unfortunately not. And I think I'm probably going to start giving up making predictions. Well, you see, to be fair to me, in January when the results of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were announced, I thought that was a complete game changer. They had a 90-95% efficacy in preventing infection. In fact, one of the other companies called me up and they said, we have a new technology to develop a vaccine. And I said, you might as well pack up and buy shares in Pfizer and Moderna, because the game is over. But it turned out the vaccine is very effective at preventing severe illness and death, but it doesn't prevent transmission that well. So unfortunately, when you're talking about communities and things like that, you need a vaccine which can prevent.
So there's still a lot of unknowns in this. So yesterday I was having a conversation with my goddaughter who lives in Melbourne, and she says, on Friday I'm finally gonna only be able to go out and eat after months and months, and she used to travel with me all the time, and she asked, when do you think I can actually just book a ticket and travel again? So I'm going to ask you that question because I can't answer her.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that's a uniquely Asia-Pacific problem. Because I have a really good friend, a classmate of mine from medical school. She lives in Florida. Her husband is a pilot, so she flies standby all over the world. And in the last 3-4 months, she's flown to Tanzania, she's been to Europe, she's been to Slovenia, to Prague. And so there are many, many parts in the world where travel is, she gets PCR tested. She said she's had swabs stuck up her nose dozens of times, but she's been able to travel. She's double vaccinated. She's even got her booster. Okay.
So how do we in APAC get out of this? So I gave the doctor some homework last night. I sent him the presentation that Dan, Timothy, Johnny, and Ross put together. And I asked him to think about the solution that they proposed. So do you wanna take us through that and say what do you think of it?
Yeah, certainly. I think the first sort of point is that I think part of the reason why in the Asia Pacific we're concerned is because we're worried about what's going to happen in the Northern Hemisphere in the winter. Because all these respiratory viruses tend to take off October, November, December. It happens with influenza. It happens with it happened with coronavirus last year. So, everyone's saying, okay, things seem to be okay in Europe and North America, but, just wait for the cold weather to come in. And so I think we'll get a better idea and get more confidence maybe at the end of the Northern Hemisphere winter.
Okay.
But do you want me to go through?
So it's going to be a longer winter then?
I think so. And so, the original idea of traveling to Penang in January, I don't think is going to happen.
I know you said that you were going to go to Penang in January, and I
Yeah.
thought I was going to travel by August. So
Yeah.
obviously we're both wrong.
Right.
Actually, so I want to ask the audience as well, because one of the recommendations was that all destinations should scrap quarantine requirements for all vaccinated travelers, right? I think that was one of the
Yeah.
recommendations. So let's go to a poll and let's see what the audience says. And what do you think? Do you think it's time for destinations to scrap quarantine requirements for all vaccinated travelers, except from those where there is a new variant of concern circulating? What would you answer to that? Oh, you. Sorry.
Oh, me?
You.
Okay, I was just waiting for the audience.
The audience is virtual. The results will come in.
Oh,
This
that's so
hybrid
sad.
world.
In scientific meetings, we ask people to choose, we show a picture of a virus and we ask them to choose which virus it is, and then we see whether they're right or wrong. But, okay, so my view on that is, I don't think that quarantine, like I said, where once the virus is in every country, unless you're dealing with a new variant of concern, the benefit is really minimal to quarantine. And the US is going to be the leader in this, because what they're talking about is quarantine-free travel for
Absolutely.
people who are double vaccinated with any WHO-approved vaccine, which is huge.
So that's really the model that we should go for. That's a gold
Well,
standard.
it depends on whether it works. So in the US, and again, this is the interesting thing about the polarization in the US. So if you have a big outbreak in a red state, then the New York Times is going to talk about it. If you have a big outbreak in a blue state, then it's going to be all over Fox News. So there is going to be somebody who's keeping an eye on what's going to happen.
Right. Okay. So there's been a complete loss of trust, right? I mean, so it really doesn't matter if WHO declares the end of the pandemic, because nobody seems to be listening to WHO anymore anyway.
No, actually, I think it does. And a lot of countries take reference from WHO. They're the wealthy countries, the high-income countries that set their own policies. But the rest of the world, most of Africa, Asia, Latin America, they take reference from WHO. And as we've seen, the high-income countries have already started to open up. The US has started doing that. The UK had their Freedom Day.
Okay.
Australia and New Zealand are outliers from that point of view.
All right. So we're still going to have to plow through this pandemic. There's some light at the end of the tunnel, but we still have to plow through. But let's talk about the future, right? Because, you said that travel had been rather passive in responding to this pandemic. And so what key lesson do you think we in travel should learn from this, so that it doesn't happen again? What could we have done better as an industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think this requires a change in the approach. And the people who have driven this have been people in, interestingly enough, like in the automobile industry. About 10, 15 years ago, there was this huge publication put out by the National Academies of Sciences in the US called To Err is Human. And it focused attention on medical errors, which nobody thought about. People thought, okay, errors occur every now and again. But they commissioned a huge study and they showed that medical errors were a major problem in healthcare. And this was not driven by the doctors or by patient groups. It was actually driven by corporations led by General Motors, who are providing a lot of healthcare to their employees. So they realized that, a lot of their employees were getting into trouble. They were going in for routine surgeries and they were getting complications. And if healthcare was not willing to do something about it, or was not aware of it, or was too caught up with other things, then industry needed to drive it. So, the travel industry has been battered by this pandemic. And this is not the last by any long stretch of the imagination. In fact, I just talked to some of my colleagues and I said, there's a good chance in 2024 we'll have an influenza pandemic. And we're back to square one. So, because we haven't had influenza for a really long time. So, I think what we need to do is we need to anticipate what's going to happen and maybe do something like what the major corporations did with medical errors 15 years ago, which is to try and commission groups of researchers. There are professional societies, the International Society of Travel Medicine.
Right.
That's a very powerful society. They have a wide membership. It includes not just infectious disease specialists, but it's got family physicians. They had their meeting here a few years ago.
Okay. So you're suggesting that a travel association or a travel authority works with this association
well, not so much an authority, but industry, to commission studies to see the value of things like quarantine. And frankly, like in Singapore, you look at the number of cases every day. We've got 3,000 locally transmitted cases. We've got less than 10 imported cases. But we still put in all these quarantine restrictions on travelers for all but 8 or 9 countries.
Right. Okay. So really showing the economic cost
That's
of
right.
such restrictions. Okay.
Rigorous studies to show that.
Rigorous. Okay. Right. What key lessons should the scientific community learn from it? Like your Society of Infectious Diseases, right?
Right.
What are they doing about it? What have they learned about this?
Yeah, we haven't actually done really very well. There's certain things that have come out well. Like for example, testing for the virus. It used to have to be done in a reference lab right at the beginning of the pandemic, and then it got to the stage where you could do it, in a hospital lab, and then you went to a family physician, and now people are doing it at home every day. So that's a huge improvement, and you don't have to have somebody stick a swab right all the way up in your nose. You can just tickle the edge of your nose, and you get a pretty accurate result. So I think when it comes to testing, we've done pretty well.
Right. What happened to the testing with the nasal spray? I mean, wasn't that going to be a game changer here?
That's the prevention with the nasal spray.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the travel journey, right, which is the most vulnerable point, you think, when you look at it as from the scientific community?
There's this huge controversy about the airline flight itself, and there are some studies that have come out of the travel medicine community which suggest that transmission on planes is actually not very common. There's some well-documented reports out of New Zealand, but New Zealand is so far away, the flight is really, really long. So short flights, very few documented transmissions on the flight itself. But having said that, I travel economy most of the time, and I'd be very happy if they space out the seats.
But our industry believes that after this, you will be irrational and buy premium airfares because you want to spend money on luxury travel now.
Yeah, but Asia has seen the everyone can fly budget airlines. So if it's going to be mandated that you have to put a meter between every seat, now everyone can fly safely, maybe.
All right. Okay, you told me that travel and medicine must work together to develop a scientific, calibrated approach towards managing pandemics, right? So what does a scientific, calibrated approach look like? Is it based on those rigorous studies that you were talking about?
Yes, it is. And of course, I'm biased because I'm an academic and I teach, research, and I do research for a living. But I think that it is really important to make decisions based on science, based on evidence, based on good studies, because otherwise it's based on anecdote. This whole thing about the fact that we can't sing in Singapore, if you go to church and you can't sing, and that's based on essentially an experience which happened in Washington State in April when they had a choir practice and a whole bunch of people got infected. So we've been trying to do these studies. We did one study actually where we had people singing happy birthday, and we measured the amount of virus that came out of the air. And we're going into the second phase of that study.
Right. Okay, that's why we had the live band performing from the hybrid broadcast studio and
right.
not here today.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a question. How do you expect to see airport testing evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I think airport testing will evolve to an ART kind of testing system. And this is new. But, when you think about it, the analogy is with 9/11. Before 9/11, I was doing my postgraduate work in the United States, and my parents came to visit me, and they were shocked that people could go right up to the aircraft door and see someone off. It was just amazing. But now you have to go through this huge queue. You have to get X-rayed. You have to get TSA to pat you down. So everything has changed. And we've kind of gotten accustomed to it. There was one shoe bomber, and you've got to take off your shoes and put them through the X-ray machine.
But yesterday, during the WiT challenge, it was said that after 9/11, it took the industry 39 days to get a unified global response, so that everybody knew what they had to do, right?
Right.
But with this pandemic, there is no global unified response. How long is it going to take for us to get a global?
I think eventually the industry will get there. And the response has also changed. The principle has changed. You can't go right up to the gate and see somebody off at the airport. But the X-rays came in later. Taking off your shoes came in after the shoe bomber. So right now we have the technology. We have an ART which can give you the result within 15 minutes. Most of the time I spend more than 15 minutes queuing up for the immigration or the
So how long do you think
security check.
how long do you think testing and all that will remain part of travel?
Unfortunately, the chances are that it's going to remain for quite a while, but it's going to become easier and easier. That you join the queue, you scan in your boarding pass or your passport, you pick up a test. By the time you're there at the X-ray machine, you've given your test and you get the result. So I think that part of the technology is working well. It's getting simpler and simpler as time moves on.
All right. So now this pandemic has shown, people the ugly side of travel, right? How it can spread viruses. Yet, you travel a lot. Like travel has done other things for the world as well, right? So what's the best thing that travel does for humanity from your perspective as a man of medicine?
Well, I think travel opens people's eyes. You get a chance to see how people do things in different countries, and everybody tends to look at another country and say, okay, why is this different from what I'm doing at home? But it really exposes you to a completely different way of life, or way of doing things, and I think that's a huge
So
advantage.
from a medical perspective,
Right.
do you think then it's really, really good for mental health? And then we're now going to go into the biggest, mental health crisis the world has ever seen after this. What do
Oh,
you think?
totally. I think there's nothing more therapeutic than sitting by a beach, reading a book, and drinking a glass of wine.
Yeah, I think we all need that therapy, right, guys?
Yeah, definitely.
Honestly, yes. All right, so now you travel a lot in the past for conferences. I remember you traveling to Boston to
Right.
deliver a paper and all that. How will you change your travel habits after this?
Yeah, I think, I have to confess, I think I told you this last time. My wife complained about it. One of the worst things I ever did was to travel, and this was business class, to Frankfurt Airport, have a meeting at Frankfurt Airport Hotel for 3 hours, and then travel all the way back to Singapore right after that. She said, you're destroying the environment. I said, yeah, you're probably right. And she refused to let me ever do that again. But I think that kind of meetings, which can be done online, will probably will end up being done online. So
Right.
they will be very selected, and this unfortunately has got an impact on your industry, I guess.
Right, and in the conference industry, because the medical
Right.
industry is full of conferences.
That's right.
So how are conferences going to come back? I mean, you say next week you're going to have a conference.
That's right. So we're going to try it out. In fact, this conference was already postponed once. There's another meeting that we're organizing on infection control. It's been postponed twice. So this meeting, we figured we just got to do it and get it over and done with.
Absolutely. Okay. So do you think that you were as effective in your job without travel?
Yes and no. So, now, the online conferences have become really a pain. And also there's the time zone issue, especially for international organizations. So like, for example, our society, the International Society for ID, the current president is based in London. Our treasurer is based in New Zealand. The past president is based in South Africa. And of course, I'm based here. So every time we hold an executive committee meeting, somebody has to wake up in the middle of the night. And they're not their best at 2 a.m. None of us are.
All right. How do you think we would have handled this pandemic if it had happened 10 or 20 years earlier?
Now, I think this is going to be a bit controversial, but you think about it, the 2009 H1N1 pandemic, that killed a lot of young people, including pregnant women. Older people were relatively spared by the 2009 pandemic. And Singapore was in DORSCON orange for 11 days. And we went out of DORSCON orange even before the first case appeared in Singapore. For a period of time, we quarantined people coming in from Mexico. We didn't quarantine people from the US, but we really screened them and we monitored them. But what happened was about 3 months after the pandemic was declared, the WHO announced that Margaret Chan, she said, this virus cannot be stopped. And so instead of going for a zero H1N1 policy, they went for a mitigation strategy, which was essentially what we would call now living with the virus. So I think the problem is that we've taken a really long time to go from trying to eliminate the virus, going from zero COVID, to trying to contain the virus, trying to protect the vulnerable, make sure there are no large clusters, get everyone vaccinated, and limit the damage that's done either directly by the virus or indirectly by the restrictions.
Right. Okay. A quick one. How do we get governments in Asia to align on the futility of quarantine? It's a very loaded question.
It is a loaded question, but I think, what's going to happen is if it works in the US or other places where they don't have quarantine, then what it's going to take is one or two governments to take the first steps. So the earlier speaker was talking from Phuket. He said he was in Phuket for 2 months.
Yeah.
That's such a hardship. Again, once you see countries like Thailand or Vietnam or even Malaysia opening up, then it's a matter of time before the other countries.
Okay, so we have a response to the poll, and it's like split. 54% said absolutely yes, scrap quarantine, and then 44.6% said depends where they're coming from. So that's a bit of a...
So nobody said definitely not.
Only 1.4%.
Excellent.
Right? I mean, so we have a very bullish audience, guys. We have a very bullish audience. Okay, I'm going to ask you one final question, right? To the physical beings here for the first time in such numbers and to our virtual audience, what's your message to travel?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, we need to make sure that everybody who can be vaccinated is vaccinated, because that's the key. And this is not something new. It's something we've had for yellow fever for parts of Africa and Latin America. It's something we've had for the meningococcus in Middle East and parts of Africa as well. So first and foremost, get vaccinated. The second thing is speak up, because I think a lot of people don't realize the impact of some of these restrictions, especially in Asia, on travel. I was just talking to someone just now where he pointed out that, the dining restrictions don't just affect locals, they affect visitors who want to come to Singapore to enjoy, the world's best cuisine.
Exactly.
And they have to deal with the possibility they can't go out as a family of 3.
Yeah, I tell my visitors now that Singapore is the perfect Tinder town. You can only dine with 2, so that's how we should be. Well, thank you so much. We have a lot of people who want to meet you, Professor, so you don't mind if I introduce you to them through email or whatever. He's just the most generous man with his expertise and time. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck with your conference.
Thanks.
Thank you.